As you know, we are looking at the question of how do we unlock secrets of transformational change agents? And I guess the first question is, what is a transformational change agent? It's a leader who brings about transformation in others. That person, be it a male or female, is a channel for God to work with others and realizing their full potential, understanding their calling, and living in it. But not only to individuals, to families, and helping companies or institutions, even societies become what they were destined to be, the best form of themselves. So welcome. We're going to be talking today mainly about some things that I have learned. I am something of a slow learner, so I learned some of these later than I wish I had learned them. And I'm still learning some of the 7 secrets that we'll be talking about. And those secrets are really sometimes methods, they're sometimes principles, they're sometimes personal experiences where you interact with God in powerful ways, and it just changes you. And then that gives you the capability of working with others to bring about change that's both individual and collective. I'd like to start with a job that I took about 12 years ago. I had had a serious health condition which had really stopped my ability to work, to drive, to function. Had a grand mal seizure, which is abnormal electrical activity in the brain. It can kill you. In my case, it didn't, but it did present me with a lot of challenges. There came a time when my wife assured me that despite the fact that I wasn't supporting the family, in fact, I was living with my mother because I needed constant care, that my family still loved me and that God still loved me, that my value, my worth, was not a function of what I produce, but the fact that I am beloved, first by God, and then by those that, my family, that never gave up on me. And that really helped to do away with some lies that I had believed early in my life, that it was all up to me, that I would be a failure like my father if my will didn't overcome all obstacles. And even though I came to Christ, it took me a long time to understand, not just in my head, but deep in my heart, in my bones, that I am the beloved. And that really is the foundation of everything, that unconditional love. And you know, we can't give away love we don't possess. That kind of love is never perfect in this life, though its source is perfect from God. But still, our ability to receive it is crucial. And the more of it we get, the more we have to give. Otherwise, much of our time and energy is proving to ourselves and others that we're worthwhile, or avoiding risk, protecting ourselves, or all the other things that we do as humans quite naturally, unless that love that we are receiving and then giving out animates us. Jesus talked about it. He said that it was like living water. This is a water that when you receive it, those unsatisfied desires, that sense that you never can really enter into the beauty you see around you, that you're always on the outside, that you're always inadequate, that there are risks that are so large that it can just drive you bonkers. Those things tend to overwhelm and confuse and distract. Add to that all of the ways that we can distract ourselves at this time in human history, and you have a recipe for what we see in much of society. So it's that foundation that gives us a rock, even in a storm like some of us are experiencing in these times. So we have a unique contribution as followers of our Lord, as those who are called to lead by being servants. I went down for an interview in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with a company called Covenant Transportation. That company has trucks that travel all over the U.S. They weigh as much as 80,000 pounds, 40 tons, when they're fully loaded. And they drive over 1 million miles a day. When you have that many trucks traveling on roads with cars, inevitably, terrible, catastrophic, tragic accidents occur. People are killed and people are terribly injured. And it was into that environment that I entered as the chief legal officer of that company. And I was immediately confronted with terrible accidents where I was in charge of our lawyers all over the United States in trying to resolve the legal issues that arose out of those accidents. And I came to believe that we could investigate ways of mitigating or lessening the harm that occurred to these families through the legal process that follows a terrible accident like that, because that gives families and their lawyers rights, and often they come into conflict with the companies that have these trucks on the road. And so I asked the CEO and the founder of the company, who is a godly man, a man who follows the Lord and who in fact founded the company on the gospel, to give me the opportunity to pilot, test, try some other approaches to see if there isn't a way that we could help the families, not only through a fair settlement of dollars, but also just by treating them as we would wish to be treated if the roles are reversed. We sometimes refer to that as the golden rule. I don't know if that term is used in your society, but of course we all know that Christ in Matthew 7:12 told us about that. In everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Now, I had signed off on that principle early, but it takes time and work and openness and God's grace to understand what that means in particular context, as we all know. So how does that work its way out in the legal proceedings, in the negotiations, in the conflict resolution context of tragic accidents with families and a company on the other side? Well, I determined that first I would take the initiative. There really is no substitute for that. Often companies wait for the other side. They do an investigation of the accident and then they wait for the other side to sue them. And then the process of trying to resolve the conflict and value the legal claims commences. And I determined that we should take the initiative to go meet with the lawyers, and if the lawyers would allow it and the families wanted to meet with families. And often I would suggest that we go out and meet with a lawyer, and I would very often take my daughter with me. She was my paralegal, and we would meet with the lawyer over a luncheon and get to know them, but take the initiative, have a face-to-face meeting much earlier than normal. And then if the lawyer allowed it and felt that it would be beneficial, then we would also meet in his office with the lawyer or lawyers and the families involved, and just give genuine condolences for this tragic accident that our company had been involved in. There was some feeling by some that if I went out and took the initiative, that it would make us look desperate, it would make us look weak, and it would really harm our negotiating position. And I just think that the opposite is true. I think it's much easier for you to sit behind your desk, in some cases hundreds or thousands of miles away, and send the local lawyer that you've hired to deal with the family and their lawyer a year or two down the road. But that if you go there with the proper motive, that you don't look weak at all. You show that you care and that you're there to do the right thing, and you're willing to approach this not as just something which is necessarily adversarial, but something which is a problem to be solved, that you can work on from both sides together. So how do you value this claim, and what can you do to show the family that you're going to assign to them a dignity because they're human beings and because they're going through one of the hardest things that you can encounter in life, and that is to lose loved ones or to be terribly injured plus lose loved ones. So that taking the initiative, I think, applies in so many different contexts. Let's switch it to a very different context. I was in West Virginia, which is a state that is close to Washington, D.C., our capital. And I went way back in a very, very rural area for a meeting with a client at one point. I drove and drove and drove through mountains. There was less and less population. I stopped at a gas station and filled up, and I had a suit and tie on and Washington, D.C. license plates on my car. I asked for directions. This was in days before GPS. I'm not sure GPS would have worked in those mountains anyway. And the fellow looked at me and looked out at my car and said, "You're going back in there?" So it was pretty remote. I did. And I was not overly excited about staying back in there late into the night. So I ended the meeting in time to get out before it was too late in the evening. But it did grow dark as I was winding my way back through those mountains that evening. And I noticed lots of brake lights of cars that were stopped in front of me. And it was a very long line winding up the side of a mountain. And there were many, many cars stopped on my side, and I could look on the road, and there were cars stopped on the other side in the distance. I could see headlights facing me. And so I pulled up to a stop. It was a light rain, but I got out of the car anyway and walked forward to see why all these vehicles were stopped. They had been there a long time because there wasn't much traffic on that road, and for that many cars to have accumulated was really something. So as I walked up, I saw that trees had fallen across the road. And I looked at the trees and thought, goodness, you know, a lot of the vehicles that were stopped were trucks, pickup trucks, and some pretty burly guys inside. And I thought, so I went over to first and knocked on a window and said, you know, why don't we get out and move these trees? We got a lot of guys here. I bet we could do it. And they said, you know, we're waiting on the police to come and do it, and the next window and the next window. And I finally gave up. And frankly, I was frustrated at that point. So I just went up and grabbed a limb and started just rocking it. And no one knew, but the tree had fallen because it was rotten. And that limb, because it was rotten, broke off in my hands. So I just sort of pushed it off the side of the mountain, and did the same thing, grabbed another limb and just started rocking it, and it broke off too. So I was able to push it off the side of the mountain. And about the time that second big limb was tumbling down the side of that mountain, I started hearing these truck doors slamming. And these guys were getting chains out of their trucks and, you know, walking forward. Well, it took about 5 minutes for the guys in that group to get enough of the trees moved so that one lane was cleared. I was anxious to be gone, so I went on back to my car and was the first car through, and I went on back and got back to DC before too late. But I've thought about that experience, and you know, they were waiting on someone to come do what they could have done. They, I dare say that the pioneers, their great grandparents that settled the West Virginia mountains, didn't wait on the government to come help them. They took the initiative. They took the first action, and they took responsibility. And there's really just no substitute for that. There's a video, if we don't have the opportunity to share the videos on this in this particular forum, but I encourage you to look it up. It's on the internet, and just look up something like stopped on an escalator. And it's of two business people. One's a briefcase and one's a lady. They're riding up an escalator. I guess we all know what that is. You just stand on it and it takes you to the next level. And so this escalator in a big building stops, and they start yelling, "Hey, someone come help us. Hey, the escalator stopped. Can anybody help us?" And they yell out, and they stand there and stand there and stand there. You could just walk on up. It stopped, but you just walk on up. I'll tell you and confess that I have been stuck on certain kinds of escalators for years. Years. I stand there yelling, waiting for someone to come start the escalator. It's not an elevator. You can just walk on up. So take the initiative. Be the first mover. Why don't we do that? There are lots of reasons, but it's one way when I would go out and meet with families and their attorneys of actually implementing the golden rule. If I were a family and my loved one was killed in an accident, it would mean a lot to me for someone to just come say, "I am sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine what you're going through." And this applies in all kinds of contexts. And there are all kinds of risks and reasons we shouldn't do it. How will we look? Will people think we're insincere? Will someone misinterpret something? Will we know what to say if they start saying something to us or crying? Well, can't eliminate all that, but you can step out. So I would ask each of you, is there some area of your life applying the golden rule, treating others as you would wish to be treated, where you're stuck on an escalator? And then the second is defining success. This really, you say, what? That's not a secret. Well, of course, we all define success. Nope, simply not true. There's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one of the most important books I've ever read. Don't agree with everything in it, but a lot of things are really actionable there. And it says, begin with the end in mind. And it's amazing how we as individuals or families or institutions, companies, even our business models don't have our end that we have in mind driving everything we do. Other things take over time, and we get confused about where we want to go. It doesn't matter how fast we go if we're not headed in the right direction. So deciding what matters most. Here is something that isn't written on the 7 secrets, but this is one of the most important things I will say. One of the most important things I've ever learned. The answers don't matter until you ask the right questions. The answers do not matter until you ask the right questions. And one of those questions is, what does success mean in my life? What is a life well lived? The end that we have in mind. Clay Christensen, until recently, was a professor. He's passed away at Harvard Business School. And he said this: it's quite startling that a significant fraction of the 900 students that Harvard Business School draws each year from the world's best have given little thought to the purpose of their lives. He's an economist. I apply the tools of econometrics a few times a year, but I apply my knowledge of the purpose of life every day. It's the single most useful thing I have ever learned. I promise my students If they'll take the time to figure out their life purpose, they will look back at it as the most important thing they have learned at Harvard Business School. He was voted by some very esteemed business organizations as the single most influential business thinker on planet Earth. He was one of the most popular professors at Harvard Business School. And he said that I can tell you in a sentence, the most important thing you will learn is to determine the end of what you have in mind. And so even among believers, yes, sometimes we have an overall idea, and hopefully we have a better extent, to a larger extent, we have asked those key questions in our lives. But to flesh those out is what we'll talk about, how we actually flesh those out, treat others as we would wish to be treated, realize, grasp, take within us the fact that we are the beloved and not just the sum of our performance. These things are the most important thing. And so we have what I think is the most influential business school on the planet, and a single thing that we can all do ourselves is the most important thing those students learn. And I've talked now to thousands of students at that school, and I can tell you that there's a great hunger for knowing purpose on the part of those students, and even in executive seminars I do there and at the law school, for being able to really understand, ask the right questions and understand our ultimate purpose. That's still useless until we know how to apply that ultimate purpose to our context, but it's necessary as the first step. I think one of the important exercises that I have had in my own life is to picture my funeral. It won't be that long. Won't be that long even if you're in your 20s. Our lives here are like a vapor, and really a preparation, an important function, stage one of a life that has no end. But what if we pictured what we would want the people that we love the most, our family and our closest friends, to be able to honestly say at our funeral? Picture that room with a casket in the front and look at the faces of your family. What would you want them to be able to honestly say about your life, about your purpose, about the depth of your relationships? How about colleagues? The same from them and your closest friends. Take a few minutes today, I encourage you, to write down a few things from that exercise, and it could be extremely significant. I'm not assuming you haven't done that, but I have found in many groups that it's astonishing how we have some general ideas, but we haven't reduced them to something in writing, and then lifted those up to the Lord in terms of calling, so He can give us specific actions and methods of transformation, spiritual disciplines, or whatever it may be, in our context, to bring those things, make those things first in our lives. And of course, we know that our relationship with the Lord is the foundation for everything. It is, and it permeates everything. Third is be authentic. Once you understand your identity as the beloved, not just in your head, but deep inside, then combine it with that purpose, the end that we have in mind. What is success in our life? With principles which make that purpose actionable, which apply it. And then with words and actions and attitudes. I had a student at HBS say after one of the classes, I now know I'll never know what to do until I know who I am. Identity is central. It's what's my ultimate purpose? Who am I? Is the universe open or closed? Is God real? What's he like? What's that mean for me? Can I be in relationship with God if there is a God? And what does that mean in terms of investment banking or whatever my vocation is? What does it mean in terms of my family? And then being authentic is just being genuine. It's aligning all of those things. Another word for aligning all those things is integrity. There's a consistency. Who you are, what you say, what you do, what motivates you. And are we ever going to achieve perfection? No, probably not even close to it. But there is a huge gap between perfection and down here. And making ourselves available to God to progress in maturity over time is much of what his purpose is for all of us in this life. Obviously, it includes things like honesty, so that you can, the way we say it in the Southern United States is, if that person tells you something, you can take it to the bank. In other words, you can count on it. And consistently being able to count on it is crucial. And people are desperate for authenticity. There's so much image, there's so much hype in this age. I mean, individuals now have image consultants. There are image consultants for dating, and if both sides have an image consultant, both sides sort of wonder what's real here and what's all image. But it's everywhere. Even just normal people on Facebook, I sometimes call it FaceTime. That shows you what I know about all this. Facebook, they appear to have one life, this idyllic existence, the perfect family, the perfect job, the perfect life. Lots of times that's fake. And, when we know the people in person, we know it. Image versus authenticity. Number 4 is build strong relationships. It's the key to life. I mean, strong relationship with the Lord, as I say, you can't give what you don't have. Where do we get it? Well, he's the source of living water. And that all of us are so thirsty for. What that means in my context, and I just say this by example because it's going to be very different in your context probably, but I'm trying to sort of flesh this out so it's not just a principle. In my case, it was going out and giving genuine condolences to the family. It's telling a grieving mother who has lost her only daughter in an accident caused by a truck. It's listening to her as she screams and cries with her 2 attorneys present in a conference room, and slides a picture, 8x10 color photograph of her daughter on her graduation and a picture of her daughter's casket across the table to you. It is allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to get behind her eyes or to picture what your mother would feel like if you had died as a result of someone else's negligence. Allowing yourself to enter into that. That's dangerous. To allow yourself to feel the pain of another to that extent. It hurts. But Christ calls us to it, to embrace the joys and the sorrows of others. It means that as you rely on him for the words when she stops talking, because you have no idea what would be most helpful. But as you pray and rely on him, that his grace gives you the ability to treat her with dignity, treat her with respect, to treat her with genuine compassion, and to offer her attorneys first steps to achieving a fair and equitable resolution of the legal issues for fair amounts and in the right way, doing it the right way. And part of that in our case is often we would, let's say a breadwinner is killed in a family and you've got a spouse and children left. And without financial help, they would lose their house while they're going through this terrible time of grief, lose medical insurance, whatever. So we would give them what we call a no strings attached check. It's just a gift. We don't even want to set off if there's ultimately a trial and a verdict, just to help them in the time, not to pressure them to enter into an agreement so that they have to enter into an agreement at an unfair amount just to survive financially. To take that off the table, to give them that money so they can take care of their bills and things like that really are the golden rule. That's what I would want to happen to my family if I had died in an accident. So, but it's considered very dangerous by some lawyers and very, not using your leverage as you should. But obviously, it's the right thing to do. When you don't do that, and you do sort of legal tactics and gamesmanship to overcome the other side, to put them on the defensive, to take their sworn deposition and talk about the time 8 years ago when the husband and the wife weren't getting along, and the wife went home to live with her mother for a month, and you start saying, "Oh yeah, you're suing us for loss of consortium and loss of your relationship, and in fact, you guys didn't love one another. Isn't it true you were separated for a whole month 8 years ago?" Well, you teach people to hate with that kind of thing. You just teach them to hate, and when you pile hatred on top of terrible grief, that's something which is an acid that destroys a human soul. It's not necessary. We would give a lot of papers. We do give a lot of papers to the family's attorneys to show the condition of the truck, the maintenance records, the hours of service of the driver, on and on and on. And instead of fighting over those things and stringing it out, we give a lot of information up front. And I just walk in and say, we've done an investigation, and it's our considered opinion that where this is the case, it's not the case in every accident, that our driver's negligence caused this accident. So we're responsible. We're not going to fight about that. It's just the truth. And we'll admit it. We'll put it in writing before the court. When you do that, one of the things the family wants is a sense of justice. And instead of just trying to beat them tactically, knowing that you're trying to do the right thing satisfies something deep within all of us. I mean, we all want justice from the time we're children, little children. This other little child in the sandbox took what was mine, and so we appeal to a parent, and we're saying this is not just. It's deep in us. These are practical ways. I could go on and on, but I'm taking way too much time. So let's. These things also allow us to build trust, and the question here is not what do I do in those contexts, but what could you do in your context? How can you apply the golden rule in your conflicts, in your situations where people distrust one another? How can you build trust? Well, I could go into that in great depth, but let me say this. It's not a matter of skills. It's not a matter of micro movements. It's not a matter of body language. All those things are secondary. You build trust by being trustworthy. Identify real interest in obstacles. It's some people think that the only thing the family wants is money. Well, in many cases, that is not their only interest. They want justice. They want someone to understand, to the extent that you ever can, the enormity of their loss, to allow themselves to feel it, to know it, to care about that loss. So ask, just ask, and then be quiet. Even if you're a lawyer, close your mouth and listen, not only with your with your head, but with your heart. Listen well. And then sometimes they want to help. They want to be a little part of making sure that another family doesn't experience this same loss. So maybe you could ask them to do a video that you show all your drivers, so that the drivers, when they're thinking about this incredible responsibility that they have in driving on the public roads, they'll see this mother's video picture in their mind and think, you know, I'm getting a little sleepy. I'm going to pull off. I'm going to spend the night, whatever it takes. And then the mother who's on the video that is shown to the drivers, who's lost her daughter, knows in her heart that she might well have saved some other mother from going through the same thing. Develop and cast a vision. Obviously that's the core of much of leadership. And as you cast your vision, put it in the context of treating others as you would wish to be treated, and give practical steps so that those you're leading can participate in that process, and not just in a directive way where you're micromanaging, but so they can own it. Cast a vision. That's what I try to do when I meet with the other side early on. Of, you know, I know this is not the normal way that we handle this, but why don't we both move to a higher level here and protect this family's from the hatred that this process so often starts, and help me figure out how we can practically do that. I have some ideas, and I'll be the first giver. I'll give you these documents. I'll give you this check. I'll do this. I'll do this. Could you respond with helping me understand this about that? You know, the medical condition of the family member who's been so hurt, and then ask for a commitment. This ask is very, very important. It's very important that you become the right person, that you become the person who can ask with sincerity, with good motives, and skillfully, not in terms of just technique, but in terms of really seeing creative possibilities for satisfying lots of interest. If we had more time, we could go into that in much more depth. But being transformed, becoming the right person, is crucial to that ask. I met with a lady whose son had been killed by a truck, and we met at a rehabilitation facility where her daughter-in-law, this man's wife, was learning to hang clothes on a clothesline because she had suffered a traumatic brain injury in the same accident. And the grandmother was the woman whose son had been killed, was taking care of the two children, young children, and a lot of responsibility for someone in an advanced age. But I approached her in this way, treating her as I would wish my grandmother to be treated. And some good things happened. And her lawyer called me after that and said, well, my client wants to fire me and hire you. And I said, you can't do that. He's on the other side. But this relationship developed. It was all appropriate and all in the presence of her lawyer. And just showing her, just doing my best to treat her as I would want my grandmother to be treated, with dignity and honesty and sincerity. And she came to me after the case was settled and said, tell the driver that I know he didn't mean to kill my son. It was just a mistake. And tell him I forgive him. That's the golden rule in action. And that's avoiding not only bitterness, hatred for her against that driver, but I think it makes a big difference in the lives of those children because she's become their caregiver.